afternoon and welcome to Faculty of Education. Welcome to panel seminar. My name is Prof Hirsh-Pasek. I joined earlier this year as the director of the Pedal Centre, which I lead with my fantastic colleagues, Dr. Sarah Baker and Dr. Jenny Gibson, amongst others. We are delighted to have, I think, the first seminar of this year. It's the first seminar since I've been here, and I feel very honoured that we've got such an illustrious and fantastic guest to do the lecture for us. So it's fantastic. If you haven't already joined the Pedal mailing list, please do, because that's where we put up information about all of our events. So if you want to find out about future events, we've got another one next week, and then going on into the autumn. So please do sign up. If you go to the webpage, there's information there about how to sign up to the mailing list for the centre. And finally, if you're a tweeter and you want to tweet, then that's fine. I've been given a suggested hashtag, which, well, in the couple. So one is play research, and another one.
Playful learning.
Playful learning. So if you want to tweet, those are a couple of hashtags. And you can use the @pedalcam link as well. Okay, that's, I think, all of the introductions. So I'm really honoured to be able to introduce to you Professor Kathy Hirsh-Pasek, who has come all the way from the States to visit Cambridge. She's a fairly regular visitor now, I understand, so that's great. She's a professor at Temple University and directs the Infant Language Laboratory there, also a senior fellow at the Brookings Institute. And she's got an extraordinary continues to have an extraordinary research career with papers and all sorts of other outputs across a whole range of child development. But with a lot of it focused on play and playful learning. And I've been reading one of her books from a few years ago, A Mandate for Playful Learning in Preschool, just over the last couple of weeks. And it feels, even though this is 2009, I think it was published, it feels incredibly timely sitting here in the UK about the importance of play and playful approaches to learning, particularly in the early years, where we're having shifts about earlier testing and earlier testing and earlier testing. Just thinking differently, and it provides some of the evidence that really backs up that there can be different ways of doing these things. So I'm very excited. I'm not going to go on because we've come to hear Kathy speak. But if you would join me in extending a welcome to Kathy. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It is great to be back in Cambridge. And thank you, Paul. I'm so happy that you took over Pedal, and with all the great people here, we're going to be working together for a long, long time in the future and really bringing play back on the radar screen. So I thank you for that and for being at the helm. I also want to thank my husband, Jeff, who's in the back, and my college buddy, Jocelyn, who's in the back, who agreed to sit through. Jeff, I think, has heard this talk maybe 10 times, something like that. So he's going to give it next time, so we'll see how it all goes. But today I want to take a slightly different angle on this, which is I want you to think about something, and that is, could we possibly start giving out prescriptions for play? Now, what would it be like if, you went to the doctor's office and the doctor literally handed you a prescription to do 20 minutes of play? I know it sounds a little bit absurd, but I want you to play along with me here. You see, it turns out that a lot of animals play, like cats play, and dogs play, monkeys play, and I have been told recently that there's new scientific evidence that an octopus plays. Don't you want to play with an octopus? I'm hearing it happen. It's a biological imperative. Yet Ed Ziegler from Yale University has suggested that play is indeed under siege. So whatever happened to play? In 1981, 40% of a child's discretionary time was open for free time, to have playtime. But that shrunk precipitously by 1997, down to 25%. And people tell us that it's almost missing in young children's lives today. This is an actual sign that Tim Gill let me use. This is from the UK. Rules of the playground. Play to have fun. No running, no jumping, no bouncing. Come on. What are you supposed to do? Just stand there and play? I don't know what that means. And David Elkind writes that in the last 2 decades, children have lost up to 8 hours per day or per week of play. That's a lot. And in the United States, I don't know if it's also true in the UK, we've stopped having recess. Is that true here too? No, thank gosh. All right, because in the US, we've decided that we have to spend so much time on academics that there is no more time to have recess. Well, let's look at what it actually looks like. Again, more from the US, because this is where some of these studies were done. The Alliance for Childhood, it's 2009. They look at 142 New York classrooms and 112 classrooms in Los Angeles. What did they find? And I want you to remember that we are talking about kindergarten. 25% of the teachers said there was no time for play in their kindergarten classroom for 5-year-olds. 61% of the New York teachers said they didn't even have time for choice time. So they have nothing like the kids can't go and just play with the blocks, which I'm going to show you later is actually pretty important stuff. 79% of the New York teachers told us what the kids were doing every day when they weren't allowed to play. Test prep. Let me say that again. Test prep. All right? So I want you to think about all the controversy that's going on in the UK right now. Should 2-year-olds be tested? What about 4-year-olds? What kind of tests do we want to give the 2-year-olds? All right, 2016, Daphne Basak, University of Virginia, reported that kindergarten has become the new first grade. She argues 80% of teachers now say that their kindergartners should go in being readers. That is up 50% from 10 years ago. Time for the arts, down 16%. Testing, here you see it, that 29% again. So the demographics around play are absolutely changing as we get more serious. And that's true on both sides of the pond. So what are kids doing instead? In the United States, some 62% of children 2 to 10 years of age have their own dedicated screen. And in the UK, that number is 75%. And I'm going to show you later that that also has some consequences. Now, the issues that I just showed you prompted the American Academy of Pediatrics in the United States to do something about it. And it turns out that they first did something about it in 2006, where they issued a white paper claiming that children needed more playtime. But as time went on, from the publication of that white paper to the current day, nothing was changing except that they were dropping more recess and having even less time for play. And so again, in 2012, they reaffirmed the position that play was actually something that was important for young children. This is a picture of Dr. Michael Yagman. And one day he called me up and he said, "We got to do something about this. People aren't getting it. It's already 6 years old since we put the second white paper out. And in fact, there's more testing going on, more academics for 4- and 5-year-olds going on. What are we going to do about it?" And he said, "I have an idea where you all sign on to a new white paper." So we keep trying. And the next time we're going to try is in this paper that's coming out in September of this year. I imagine it'll be blown up all over both sides of the pond. We, honest to God, are recommending that doctors give prescriptions for play. So you let me know if it works. So today, in this talk, I want to give you the reasons why. First, I want to define what I mean by play. And I'm going to talk about a number of different types of play. One being free play, but another equally important, notice I said equally important because I believe in free play, is what I'm going to call guided play. And I want you to understand what I mean about that distinction. And then I'm going to show you that play actually has consequences for young kids. And places like Pedal and places like our labs and places like David, who's done a lot of work in this area, we've been looking at it forever. And now all of a sudden it's gaining some currency. And yes, Sarah, you are implicated on this too. All right. So we have been finding out that when you have playful learning, guided play experiences, kids actually learn more and are more motivated to learn. So I want to give you 3 cases. One area is going to be in coping behavior, which I'm going to just give you as a drive-by, and then I'm going to leave it to Paul to tell you all about it later. I'm also going to talk to you about social learning and executive function, which is memory, attention, flexibility, and impulse control. The fancy name, as anyone in our field now knows, is executive function. Those of you who are teachers, who are outside our field, if you want to sound super cool at your next cocktail party, just say, I'm working on EF skills, okay? Short for executive function skills. It'll definitely make you sound like you are in the know. All right, and I'm also going to show you what we know about play and cognition. And then I'm going to show you what we can do to foster more play in our homes, in our classrooms, and in the community. And then open it up for questions at the end. So let's define free play and let's define guided play. Free play, whether with objects, fantasy or make-believe or physical, it's got to be fun. Everyone with me on that. Active, not passive. Has no extrinsic goals, is iterative in that you keep trying, and it doesn't really have a cost to you if you keep trying. It's like a scientist. Meaningful in that it's something that means something to you rather than is so distant that you have no idea what someone's talking about. It's often, though not always, socially interactive, and it can, but it need not contain an element of make-believe. All right, everyone with me on the free play? Good. Guided play is defined in 2 ways in the work that we're doing. In one, it's a planned environment. So if you've ever been to a children's museum or a Montessori school, you see that things are placed into that environment. They're almost curated in that environment, so that the kids will trip on the learning goal. But note, the child is the one who is still in charge. The child takes the initiative here. You got it? Or at least the direction here. Very, very important, and it's fun. The other way it can happen is if a kid is doing something and the adult doesn't just take over, but the adult acts as a coach, not as a director. All right, that's a very important distinction. And we all know these parents, and I might have been one at some point, where you're almost like a CEO parent, like, oh, do it that way, it'll be better. And what we're trying to get at is that you're back there saying, what could you do with that? How could you play with that? And suggesting the next step for children without literally taking them and forcing their hand. All right, does everyone have what guided play is? All right, let's look at some of the distinctions here. If it is initiated by the child and directed by the child, we call it free play. If it is initiated by the child and directed by the adult, the child really wants to do something like build a circus, and the mother comes in and says, or the father comes in and says, oh, you're building a circus. We need elephants. Let's put the elephants here. Oh, we better have lions. They have to jump through hoops. Notice what I've done. I've now taken away the child's agency by doing it myself. We call that co-opted play, okay? If it is initiated by an adult and directed by an adult, we call that direct instruction. And I don't care how much fun you think it is, it still ain't play, all right? It's really direct instruction dressed up in play clothes, or as one of my colleagues called it, chocolate-covered broccoli. Great name, right? Now this is the area that I'm really interested in. It's initiated by an adult, but directed by the child. Can you see that? The adult is the one who comes up with the plans for that Montessori classroom, if it's done right. The adult is the one who comes up with the plans for what they're going to do in that children's museum. But then you let the kid loose in it, and the child has just the right prompts along the way to lead her to the things that you're hoping she'll get as a goal. Now, recently we thought of another metaphor. I had to put this in this morning because I just learned today that this paper is now in press, and I was so excited. So here we go. We can also define play as a kind of spectrum, almost like the way we think of the autistic spectrum or people falling on the autism spectrum. I'd like us to think of something like a play spectrum, where we move from a free play to a guided play. Games is a really interesting thing and understudied, so I hope Petal will take some time and study games, because games are pretty structured, right? But the kid moves in the game, but is more tightly constrained by the rules of the game. And finally, you can have highly directed play over there. All right, the research suggests that these types of plays, and my argument will be for learning mostly guided play, is going to have an impact on coping skills, on social regulation, language and literacy, STEM, and hypothesis testing, among others. And now what I want to do is just give you a smattering of some of the research that we've been doing in other labs and in our labs to make my case. Let's start. Oh, sorry, I did want to give you this slide, and I was going to start with coping, but let's start here, which is that people are starting to realize it. There was a new piece that came out just this year, and whoops, I want you to notice that Greg Duncan is one of the authors. Greg Duncan, who was advocating for putting more and more academic curriculum for younger kids in preschool. And I don't think he's wrong about that, especially for low-income kids who have no books in their home. But notice what he wrote, that we should move far from the drill and kill methods and move to playful learning pedagogies as a way to expose young children to the curricula that we find important. I think that's a really good point. There was also a study that came out last year by Robert Fuller in the UC system. If you can combine creative play with rich language, formal conversations, and math concepts, it's more likely to yield the cognitive gains that they observed in their research. And now I take you to the advantages and start with play and coping behavior. There's actually studies that have been done in medical settings, and in these medical settings, they find that when they use pretend play, that it helps the kids by reducing anxiety, and it also has effects on lessening pain. That's kind of amazing that it can be used for coping in that way. Further, play is related to emotion regulation that reduces stress, protective factors that improve well-being, and reduction of anger, stress, and conflict. Now, there's not a lot of literature here. However, some people believe that play may be the antidote to some of the toxic stress that is experienced by many people who are in stressful environments, where it's under-resourced communities. It could just be that play is going to be one way to help with their coping behavior. Play and social regulation, these executive EF skills for impulse and emotion control, self-guidance of thought and behavior, planning, self-reliance, socially responsible behavior, attention and memory, has actually been much better studied. And for those of you who are in the field, you probably heard about the Tools of the Mind program, a brilliant program by Deb Leong and Elena Bedrova. The Tools of the Mind is in many schools in the United States, and they play through the school day with certain well-initiated exercises like, I'm going to be the mouth, but you be the ears. And then you're lucky. In 5 minutes, you get to be the mouth, and I'm going to be the ears. Teaching listening skills, teaching waiting skills, teaching EF. All right? Has it been successful? Yes, the research shows, published even in the journal Science, the research shows that kids not only do better in executive function skills, but those executive function skills lead to advances in math, language, and literacy. So these EF skills turned out to be really, really important. For those of you who study this stuff closely, there was some controversy over the Tools of the Mind program that came out of the Thal lab at Vanderbilt. But a recent study that was done by Clancy Blair's group at NYU finds indeed that if you stick to the law of what Tools of the Mind tells you to do, guess what? You still get those advances at the other end. And they try these in low-income environments in the United States where it has been tested. So it turns out that you need to do it, and this is very important, with fidelity. You need to do it through the entire school day. But if you do, it doesn't just reap the rewards on EF, it reaps them for academic and social outcomes as well. There's also Megan Mcclellan, who's at Oregon State, who has done some absolutely stunning work. This is a picture of her book, Stop, Think, and Act, which also shares with you that she is working on EF skills too. And she finds that if you do things like a drum circle, it actually helps kids get better executive function skills. So too, by the way, does Simon Says. And if you've never tried it, I thought I would actually show you what that feels like. So right now what I'm going to do is I'm going to clap once or I'm going to clap twice. This is the easy part, guys, so please get it right. Your job is to clap once. If I clap once, clap twice. If I clap twice, are you ready? It's a group of Cambridge people, so I'm expecting really high performance. All right, ready? Beautiful. All right, you ready for the next? Here we go. When I clap once, you clap twice. And when I clap twice, you clap once. Everybody got the instructions? Okay? Now what I want you to notice while you're doing this is I want you to notice how hard it's going to be because you think it's going to be really easy, but it's not. And that moment you're going to feel, there, you want to jump. That's EF at work. Are you ready? I'm not seeing real readiness. Are you ready? Yes. Okay, here we go. Oh, come on. A group from Cambridge University should do better than this. All right, it turns out that these kind of games, and she's actually written down these games in this book and in some of her research, conducting music, drum circles, it all builds EF skills, which we know then builds academic skills. All right, what about literacy? Well, you might give me that maybe play is good for social skills, but come on. You're really going to show me that it works for literacy and STEM? Well, here we go. Telling stories, wordplay, singing songs. It actually does work. Let me give it to you. Do you all know this song? Or maybe it's only popular in the U.S.? Ba, 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 baran. You know it? Ba, ba, ba. Come on. Ba, ba, baran. Everyone. Ba, 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 baran. All right, you can stop. You've just done phonics. And it's a much more fun way to do phonics. All right, we've done some study that was supported by our Department of Education. And what we did is we read a book to kids. These were on Head Start schools, and the Head Start schools in the United States are our schools that we have for struggling kids who are 3 through 5 years of age, okay? We read the book, and then we got props that went with the book. So we did a read aloud. That's what you're supposed to do to really teach vocabulary to young kids in the United States. You have a read aloud, and then you're supposed to kill them with the vocabulary. No, not really, but that's kind of what it feels like. And so we did that, and then we give them either a free play condition. Oh, look, here's some toys. Wow, there's a knight, there's a horse, go for it. Or we give them what we call directed play. Now make the horse go to the castle. Is that deadly or what? Okay, but it's play. And third, guided play. We said, wow, what could you do with a horse and a knight? There's even a drawbridge. All right, the kid then takes the initiative. It was 3 kids at a time, and we wanted to see what would happen in this condition. Now here comes the first shock. The first shock in the data. I had fully believed when I started this research, so believed when I started this research, that free play was going to be the way to go, okay? In fact, all my hypotheses suggested free play would outscore, the kids in free play would outscore everyone else on the vocabulary. I even called the title of the book, Play Equals Learning. And a very well-known academician from Columbia came up to me one day and he said, you're going to regret that someday. Today is that day, but for those of you who are younger scientists, I want to tell you it's okay to be wrong. Let the data speak, okay? And the data did speak. Just want you to notice free play over here. That's the one that's in the toilet, okay? Really bad. And these guys are both operating at near 60%. The guided play number was just a little bit higher. And actually, on receptive vocabulary, I don't have that graph with me, it was actually significantly higher. But, you know, not anything to go home and tell your grandmother about. All right. We have continued this because not everybody likes to play with figurines. So in our most recent research, we read the book, and then we would review it with games. Sometimes it was music. We had a song that they could use. Sometimes we had a large board game. Sometimes it was a small board game. And we did a digital game, and we wanted to see, would the kids learn more vocabulary if they got to play when they were rehearsing the vocabulary, rather than, and this is the control condition, having flashcards, which reviewed the definitions. Now, you know that's what they really do, right? You do flashcards with definitions. This is the traditional way. And I'm happy to tell you the results just came in a couple days ago, so we're still cleaning them. But the results suggest that the play conditions work better than the flashcard condition. All of them do. Anyone want to guess what the best play condition was? Come on, do I have any bets? How many go for large board games? Anyone for large board games? Small board games? Anyone want to go for music? Does anyone vote for music? And you guys are exactly right. Music won. Okay? So we're still trying to sort out exactly what that means. This is one of our games. This was a Chutes and Ladder game. It was done by postdoc Brenna Hossinger-Das. And what we did is we read the book, and then we would review the words by playing this game. Here you can see them Finnish, intelligent, galloping, and they played a fun game, and then they would tell us the definitions. And what I want you to notice here is at the beginning, right, the control group was actually even doing a little bit better. This is nouns, this is verbs, this is adjectives and prepositions. Now look what happens at post-test. This is the intervention group, and this is the control group. All right? So by playing the game, the kids did a whole lot better, leading us again to believe we should be playing more with our kids in school if we want better vocabulary. Ah, yes, but could it possibly work with STEM or STEAM or STEM or STEAM? It all depends on whether you want to put the arts in. All right. Turned out one day, Mayor Bloomberg decided that the blocks were going out of the classrooms and kindergartens in New York. No one could believe it, but Dr. Kathy got a call. Save us! We need to put the blocks back in the classroom. I thought, this is unbelievable. I actually have to do research on how good blocks are. So we did research on how good blocks are. Turns out, when you dump blocks in front of kids, then kids and their parents start using all these really cool terms like, could you put the red one on top of, next to, through, in, under? Spatial terms. And those spatial terms become really important for later STEM learning. We talk more about space in certain place situations over other. Again, free play didn't quite do it. But guided play, when we said to these same adults and kid pairs, can you build a garage? Can you build an airport? All of a sudden, in that guided play condition, the numbers went up. Why is it important? It's important because in some of the research that we have done in our lab, we find that that early spatial language, early spatial ability actually relates not only to later spatial ability, but to later mathematical ability. And now you're wondering, what is she talking about? Where is there space in numbers? But now just think about the numbers from 1 to 5. Did you notice what you did? Did you notice? Actually, I should do it your way, right? You created a number line. And it turns out that understanding the number line is really important for getting number and getting density and getting extent. Wow, space relates to number. Here's a little tidbit you can carry to that same cocktail party. It turns out that neurological signatures for early spatial development and math development are in the same part of the brain. That is way cool, isn't it? So number depends on space. Over here you can just see our 2D test of spatial ability that we call the TOSA. We published it last year in an SRCD monograph, and it turns out that you can test very young kids to see if they can simply copy these designs. And notice how we change the rotation and we change where the shapes are relative to one another. It turned out to be a very accurate test. This is the 2D version and the 3D version, where, of course, you get to use some cute Lego blocks along the way. Another example in STEM, we looked at kitty geometry, and you ask, what is kitty geometry? It's shape learning. Now, it turns out that we're terrible at working with shapes with young kids. Did you know that every triangle you ever show a little kid has a point on the top? It does. And it's always this beautiful equilateral triangle. It's just gorgeous, right? Well, what could a kid learn about triangles? That triangles are the things with the point on the top. So then we went and we looked to see what's in shape books. Maybe it's different in shape books. They actually give weird tilted triangles. But indeed, they do not. It's always the thing with the point on the top. And we wondered, could they actually learn the criterial features of a triangle? So here we go again. Now I guess you're getting the pattern of how we do this research. We have a guided play condition, we have a direct instruction condition, and we have a free play condition. In the guided play, they're taught kind of the rule-based classifications, but they have to discover it. We don't tell them. Oh, what do you notice? Remember I told you about the coach on the side? What do you notice about these two things? Oh, even if I tilt it that way, does it still have those things? And they go, oh, 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. And they tell you, we have beautiful videos of this stuff. All right? Direct instruction, well, you know what that is. Triangles. A triangle has 3 sides and 3 angles. Triangle. Did you get it? Okay, so that's the direct instruction. And then free play, you know, give them a whole lot of triangles, right? They will somehow just inhale it, and then they will know what a triangle is. So we actually tested this. We had good old Lilu the puppet. And we had all these weird triangles. Some were good, some were not so good, some were not triangles, some were rectangles, some were not good rectangles. And all you had to do Lilu the puppet only liked the real thing. Give her a real rectangle, give her a real hexagon, give her a real triangle. And the kids would go out and sort it. So at this point, I think I can ask you for the answer. Who won? Have you got it? It's the guided play condition. There they are. That's with typical shapes, atypical shapes, and they were able to reject non-valid shapes. So it turns out, again, and I just want to put this in your mind, that when you have a learning goal, free play is not the way to get there. And we'll talk about why that might be the case. I wanted to tell you that Sim and Zhu have also used this for scientific learning. Here you can give, there's this really cool thing you can do where you have a box and you want to open the box or you want to get a sound from the box. And it turns out you train them up with something that is like a green circle, but only the circle part will give you the ding. Can you figure out what to pay attention to? So the kids have to be scientists. They have to test out, oh, could it be the color? Not the color. Maybe it's another shape with that color. No, that won't work. Oh, maybe it's any kind of circle no matter what color. Bing, you got it. Excuse me. All right, she finds guided play condition is better for the younger kids, and it turns out in free play they can get some answers as older kids. And this is one of my favorites. Alison Gopnik actually put it best when she said preschoolers outsmart college students in figuring out gadgets. Preschoolers can outsmart you all if you just give them a gadget. But this toy is a toy that they invented. This toy has 4 different functions. If you flick a switch, a light goes on. If you press a button, it has a ding. If you do something else, there's a bell. All right, and the kids could discover, potentially could discover all 4 things that this weird toy does. Group 1. Group 1, the adult comes in and says, oh, look, if you flick the switch, the light goes on. Look, look, flick the switch. And then lets the kid play with the toy. The other person comes in and says, wow, this is one really radical toy. Wow, this is so cool. Here, see what you can do with it. Group 1, Group 2. The kids in Group 1 only flick the switch. They spend the entire 10 minutes flicking switches and doing exactly what they were told. The Group 2, they found out all 4 features because they were the explorers and discoverers. They were playing, and they were in a safe environment. I should tell you that it's not always the case that some of this works. We've tried to look at some of the electronic toys that are out there that kids are playing with. These are 2 of the first studies that I know about. One was done by Annie Sosa, and she found that when parents are playing with electronic toys, they let the toy take over, and the amount of conversation that they have with the kid plummets. We decided to look, since we were doing shapes anyway, with shape sorters, talking shapes. And that's Jen Zosh, who's done a lot of this work with me. And what did we find? That the shape sorter 2, it talks and talks and talks. In fact, it talks about as much as moms do and dads do when they have a traditional shape sorter. But the parents give it over to the electronic voice, and the kids don't learn as much about shape in the electronic shape sorter as they do in the traditional one. So the question that's before all of us, especially the scientists in the room, is what the heck? You just showed me that it can work in coping, that it can work in social skills, that it can work for things like literacy, and David has done amazing, amazing studies in literacy. Why does this work, David? Why should play, little old play, that all these animals can do, have these impacts, and why in particular does guided play make a difference? So I'm going to give you 5 big ideas. Big idea 1, Well, you know, we know how kids learn. Kids learn best when they're active rather than passive, when they're engaged rather than distracted, when something's meaningful rather than meaningless, and when something's more socially interactive. So play embodies all of this. And so in that sense, you're capitalizing on all that we know from the science of learning that works to help human brains learn. Big idea too. One person who I love, a woman named Susan Fitzpatrick, who runs the McDonald Foundation in the US, she said, "You know what you're talking about?" And I said, "No, what am I talking about?" And she said, "Constraint tinkering." And I love that term, so I've stolen it. Isn't that beautiful? Constraint tinkering. The reason that we've all come to believe that direct instruction works in classrooms, guys, is because kids are never going to figure out a hypothesis if we don't help them get there. Do you see that? What direct instruction does is it points you in the right direction so that you're more likely to make a good guess rather than a bad guess. But can you see it now? Guided play does the same thing. It's constrained tinkering. Number 3. This actually came from the late Jerry Bruner. I don't know if you've ever read any Jerry Bruner, but he's kind of a hero of mine. And when I studied at Oxford for my junior year abroad, I actually had the opportunity to study under the late, great Jerry Bruner. And I went up to Jerry because we were at a conference together about 4 years ago. Jerry was then almost 100, maybe, yeah, he was 99. And he didn't want to walk the 2 blocks to get to lunch. So I said, "Jerry, I'll bring you lunch if you let me ask you a million questions." And he said, "Absolutely." So I brought back lunch right away. And I said, "What do you think? What is it about play that's making it work? Why is guided play doing so much for kids?" And he said, I swear, it was just like this. It was like these movies, you know, where Yoda speaks. He turned to me and he went, "Mise en place." I said, "Excuse me?" And he said, "Mise en place." It's just like what happens in cooking. If you've put the right stuff out for someone beforehand, it makes it easier for them to pull the recipe together. I love that. Isn't that great? Mise en place. It sets up a learning disposition that puts you in the right direction. Big idea 4. Well, maybe it's about joyfulness. I mean, if I like something, I'm more likely to do it more. I'm more motivated. We have not studied joy enough. Maybe it's time to study joy. We've studied a lot of negative stuff, but we haven't studied a lot of what joy does in learning. And Adele Diamond tells me this may be the key to what makes play so powerful. Big idea 5. Last year and a half ago, Roberta Golinkoff and I, who's my longtime collaborator, we went through the entire science of learning literature. And we wanted to find out what are the suite of skills that we know people can learn, we know are malleable, that build upon one another, and should really be the base of how we think about learning. And when we did this review, which I have to tell you was thousands and thousands of pieces of paper that turned out on one grid, here's what we came up with. Those of you who are developmental psychologists are seeing a lot of developmental in here, but I promise you it takes you all the way from the sandbox to the boardroom. Let's start with collaboration. You have to know how to get along with other people because we learn by working in groups. And again, for those of you in developmental, you know how you start on my own, then you move to parallel play, right? All the way up through the levels. But communication is critically important. A lot of people today are trying to teach just content, just this area. So if you try to teach reading and you don't teach the language behind it, you will be decoding into something you don't understand. You won't really be reading. Does that make sense to everybody? So, and communication depends on collaboration. So, collaboration, communication allows you to learn content. But in the world we live in today, there is simply too much content. And so we need the ability to sift through critical thinking, which allows us to be strategic about how we deal with content. Do you know, by the way, that it is projected that each one of you reads over 74 newspapers a day? The equivalent of 74 newspapers a day. That's a lot of information you sift through. How do you hold it? How do you take it till tomorrow? I know we don't. So critical thinking. Creative innovation, the science tells us, is built upon critical thinking and content. If you don't have enough content, the 10,000 hour rule, for those of you who have studied it, you're not going to be great at any creative endeavor. And we added confidence. And confidence is growth mindset and grit, perseverance, sticking with it, knowing that you can. We suggest to you today, I posit to you today, that these 6 skills, these 6 C's, as I call them, coalesce in play. You find the ability to grow each one of them in the sandbox, and they follow us through life as we get to the boardroom. And we wrote about that in our book, Becoming Brilliant, talking about the foundation for learning. So let me move on to give you the wrap up and what we can do to foster more play at home, at school, and in the community. First, I think it's not crazy to think that with all this data behind us, maybe pediatricians can consider having prescriptions for play. In fact, Dr. Alan Mendelsohn is doing some research on just this at New York University, where he had a study that came out just last week. And what he did is he looked at 0 to 3-year-old, 15 different visits when parents came into the doctor's office. He would film them playing and then give them a reflection on the kind of playing that they did to show the power of what they were doing and what the kids were learning. Only 15 of these visits. Here he had 3 to 5-year-olds, 9 visits that were 30 to 45 minutes. Results showed improved outcomes in child behavior, hyperactivity, and enhanced social development, and this lasted longitudinally as the kids got into school. A prescription for play? Maybe not so crazy. At school, I think we can do a lot more with some of the projects that David has helped us see, and looking at literacy in the classroom with the stuff that I just showed you about ways to review words in the classroom. If we do it in a more playful way, maybe the kids will want to do it, and maybe they'll learn just a little bit more. There's some beautiful stuff that came out 2 weeks ago called the Knowledge Matters campaign. You can take a look at it. Just started in the US, and it's fabulous. What are they saying? Hey guys, we've been teaching reading all wrong. If it's meaningless, if it's not fun, if you can't put the words together to make anything that you'd want to learn, then forget it. The kids are going to learn decoding, but they're never going to be able to read to learn. They will have just learned to read. Not good enough. And what opportunities might exist out in the world? Well, did you know, at least in the US, and I think the numbers are similar here, did you know that children spend only 20% of their waking time in school? I know you will doubt me, so go home and calculate it for yourself, okay? This has been published several times. It's really true, all right? And that leads us to ask, what are we doing with the other 80%? And I've started a new campaign under what I'm calling Learning Landscapes to actually change the way we think about the other 80% moving into informal learning platforms. Example 1, urban thinkscape. Like, what do people do at an everyday bus stop? I'll tell you what they do, because we've now studied it. They sit there and they look at their cell phones, and they completely ignore their kids who are sitting right next to them. Question: if we know puzzles build STEM knowledge, if we we know that we could encourage more literacy, if we know that there are things that we could change, that like this hopscotch game that we created to do EF skills, could we possibly get more parent engagement at bus stops? Could we possibly pull together the city rejuvenization, the global cities movement with the education movement and make a difference for families? We're trying just that. This is a low-income neighborhood in Philadelphia. We are working with architect Itai Palti and my postdoc student, Brenna Hossinger-Das, who's just moved to Pace University. And by God, if we didn't put up a play wall that has puzzles, the executive function hopscotch, and a way to tell stories at a bus stop. First results are just in. Probably I shouldn't even be telling you this because it's so early and they're not cleaned yet, but I have to. How about a 40% increase in parent-child interaction at the bus stop? How about people getting up and moving? How about a 20% decrease in looking at their cell phones? That's like incredible. And notice you only have to get philanthropic dollars once because cities actually build bus stops. You know what I mean? So if you can show that it works, bazoom, there you go. The ultimate block party, we took over Central Park in New York City. I know it was completely insane, but stay with me for a moment. 28 different science of learning activities around the park for parents to just come and sample with their children. And by gosh, they did. Let me just give you the one that I thought was going to be the craziest one that absolutely wouldn't work. It came from Pat Cool, the leading person who has come up, I would think, with educational neuroscience. Absolute genius. First brain Meg in the United States. She said, "My troops want to do bilingual bingo." I said, "Really, Pat? There's 28 activities. You can't come up with something better than bilingual bingo?" She said, "No, you watch. It's going to be amazing." People flooded in. When I say flooded, we had over 60,000 people that day in Central Park, came to see what we were doing in the middle of New York City. True scene, because she actually set up a fun flanker task, for those of you who know what it is, right in the middle of Central Park. Had a lady. She's with her kid. She's holding her kid real tight. She's looking at her sheet in Spanish that she should come to this afternoon in New York City. Standing up straight, holding that hand as she turns to me and Pat, and she said, "You know what?" We said, "What?" She said, "Till today, I never knew that having two languages was a good thing." 28 different activities, all to show off how kids learn. Naturally, we studied it, and we published it in the journal Child Development just last year. The supermarket study. Well, gosh, I was feeling empowered by this time. So I thought, well, maybe you could actually change supermarkets. Like, why not? Maybe if we put signs in supermarkets as prompts, maybe people would actually pay attention to them and they would talk more to their kids. So we put up signs at that time. The signs cost me all of, are you ready, guys? $60. Swear to God. A student in my class was going out with somebody who was learning graphic arts, who drew broccolis. This is actually the fancy signs. Did you know there's learning in those supermarket aisles? And I want to show you what I just got in from South Africa. This is a little film that they sent me about how they're doing it in South Africa. It's growing and it's going across the world. Just this morning, I got an email from someone in Nairobi who said, "We're building bus stops, Kath. Get ready." So they're actually running this in Joburg right now, and I think they have some studies going on in Cape Town, and you can actually do this. Let me just give you two more ideas. This is Andy Bustamante, and he has helped me. He's a postdoc who has helped me develop Parkopolis. And Parkopolis is the human-sized board game for study of STEM, scientific reasoning, and early mathematics. What you might notice here is that we changed dice. Dice are no longer 1 to 6 and 1 to 6, but 1 to 6. And do you see it, guys? Fractions. You can actually move on this board 2.5 spaces. This is opening up in the city of Philadelphia next week, actually on the 24th of May in the local Children's Museum. Pilot results suggest already kids are talking about fractions. Kids are talking about how exciting math is, and they're pulling cards and doing patterns. Unbelievable. And the last one I want to show you is what you can do with a library. This is what we call Playbrary. We took some branch libraries in Philadelphia, and I want you to notice over here the new climbing wall. Anyone notice the letters? They're climbing on letters because they can make words as they ascend and descend. And over here, this is a nook that we created in the bookshelves where people can actually read, but they can take the pieces out and the pieces become seats. And the seats are all tangram puzzles so that they're learning STEM while they're doing their seating arrangements. We're now doing this throughout the city of Philadelphia and actually also in Chicago, Seattle. As I said, we're going to be moving into Nairobi soon. I think learning landscapes is a really cool way of conquering the other 80% and thinking beyond the classroom to augment what goes on in the classroom with other kinds of really cool projects. Philadelphia Playful Learning City is our main lab. Well, I hope I've given you some data, and I hope I've convinced you that it might just be time to have prescriptions for play. Because play helps us cope, it helps us socialize, it helps us learn. Play is not the opposite of work, rather they coexist together. I think if we can make our classrooms and our out-of-class playful learning environments, our kids can learn all 6 of the C's and have healthy development and later success. So I thank you, I thank the families, many, many, many of them that have made this possible. It's taken a lot of funding organizations to help us do what we have been doing, and I look forward to working with any and all of you on the new ideas that I hope have been sparked today so we can move the play movement and the play research forward to help all kids thrive. Thanks so much.